It is good to see those who are with us tonight, and if you are watching online, we certainly are appreciative that you are with us as well. This is the first Sunday of the month, and as such, we hold this out for a Bible question and answer session, which we'll be doing tonight as well. It's interesting that Josiah picked that song. I didn't tell him to do it, but that song has a lot to do with what we are actually going to be looking at tonight for this question at hand. And the first line of the chorus of that song is that there are no tears up there. And that has everything to do with the location of heaven. The question that we're going to be looking at tonight, and again, I just want to kind of pause there and reiterate that if you do have a question that you would like addressed during the Bible question and answer at any time, just make sure you turn those in the foyer. There is a box out there that you can turn those questions in. Or you can give them to me, but I always try to answer them as quickly as I can and give it the attention that it certainly deserves. There's a lot of great questions that do come in, a lot of good discussions that can be had of these different questions. The questions we're going to be looking at tonight is one that is, it comes up, this question does come up every once in a while, and for a while it wasn't such a hot topic, and then it kind of rears itself every once in a while, and that is, does heaven and earth, or does new heaven rather, and new earth, and we read that in the Bible, mean that we will live on a renovated earth after we die? This is one that is a very interesting question that arises. We're not going to give it the premillennial addressing, because there are times that the premillennialists use this. But it doesn't mean that. But it doesn't always happen that way. There are some who do not believe in the premillennial theory. Of course, that's a false doctrine in and of itself. But they still believe that earth may be a renovated earth after we die, and that essentially it's going to be heaven on earth. I do want to caution you to be careful in making this a fellowship issue, because there are some brethren that do take the position that we are going to live on this renovated earth, that after we die, God's going to clear the earth, and that's what the belief is. He's going to clear it off with the fire and so forth, and we'll be looking at that tonight, and make it essentially a brand new place for people after they die to live here, and it's going to essentially be heaven on earth, and that this is going to be the dwelling place for mankind on earth. And so, but while we do not, I'm very careful in making this a fellowship issue, I do believe the Bible provides clarity on this issue. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. There are 4 passages of Scripture on the new heavens and new earth. And if you want to look at those, we're actually going to be looking at a number of Scriptures tonight. And so I'll try to go as slowly but thoroughly, and because we want to address this in a very fair way and a thorough way in looking at this. I don't believe there is anything that lends itself to believing that the earth is going to be renovated, first off. And if you do, we can talk. But I want to just look at what, these questions or the Scriptures at hand. The first passage that we see this in is in Isaiah 65:17. In fact, there's 2 passages in Isaiah that actually make mention of new heavens and new earths. Isaiah 65:17 reads, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind." The second one in Isaiah is in Isaiah 66:22. And he writes, "For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says the Lord, and so shall your descendants and your name remain." And the other 2 are in the New Testament. One is in 2 Peter 3:13. And Peter writes in the second letter, "Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells." And the last one is found in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 1. John writes, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and also there was no more sea." And we'll get to that. Now, here's an important thing to realize when we look at all 4 of these passages, which we're going to be addressing, some probably a little bit more in depth than others. But it is very important to understand that all 4 of these references are figurative language. We cannot make something figurative literal. And it's important to go both ways with that. But these are all references of figurative nature. And it is important, we always run into this with Revelation. We run into it a lot with prophecy when we talk about it. And there are two of the passages that actually have to do with prophecy that we'll be looking at here. First one is Isaiah 65 and 17. But you notice in both of these passages in Isaiah, we want to make sure that we give the attention to the wording of these, because it helps us understand what he's talking about, what he's referring to. In 65:17 of Isaiah, you notice he says, I will create, or I make. And in 66:22 of Isaiah, he says, I will make. That is to create. That is to make something that is new, that is not there yet. And in the case of Isaiah, both of these passages, and if you look at all through Isaiah, he's a writer of messianic proportions. These are messianic scriptures having to do with something that is in the future. And if you look at Isaiah, not only does he talk about the Christ, but he talks about the church of Christ. And with Isaiah, with much of his writing, he lets us know that God had a plan. In fact, it started from the very beginning of time, and it has everything to do with the Old Testament and connected to the New Testament, that God had a plan when the Gentile, remember, the Jews were his chosen people, but it wasn't always going to be like that. There would come a point when the Gentile would become a part of that plan, and he's talking about right here, the church of Christ. That's, when you look all through Isaiah, he's making reference after reference with these messianic prophecies about this coming church, about this coming kingdom. And when you look at 65:17, he's going to create this new heavens and a new earth. It's not a literal heavens, it's not a literal earth, it's a figurative heaven and earth. And when you hold that up against, and that's one of the most important things that we can do when we do a study like this, is to hold this up against other scripture so that we don't bring it out of context and we don't make something of it that it's not. And so he's making a messianic statement right here that about the church of Christ. And so this figurative language is talking about this future church. Now, when John saw it, when we look at this in Revelation 21:1, he talks about the church of glory after judgment. And when you look at that first verse, he's saying everything is passing away and there's going to be no more sea. That term no more sea, when you read most commentators, they'll agree that no more sea means just no more population. It's going to be gone. Why? Well, because, this is talking about everyone's going to be facing judgment. No, nothing else is going to be here. And when nothing else is here, judgment's going to take place. Remember, Matthew said the same thing, that, once we pass away, then the judgment. Not going to be more than one judgment. Everyone's going to face that judgment at the same time. And so there's going to be no more population. It's going to be gone. One verse that we can really connect with this is 1 Corinthians 15:24. And you want to look over there, and then we can compare this with what we're talking about right here. Paul writes in his first letter to Corinth, he says, then comes the end when he, Christ, delivers the kingdom. What kingdom? Well, his kingdom, his church. Then comes the end when Christ delivers the kingdom to God the Father. Now, here's where we have to keep in mind is the location of everything. And this is where the immediate context comes into play. Number one, where is God when Paul writes this? Well, he's in heaven. And so when Paul tells these people that, then comes the end when Christ delivers the kingdom to God the Father, and he's going to deliver it to God the Father who is in that heavenly realm. God the Father's not on earth. He wasn't on earth at that point. He doesn't say anything about God the Father coming to earth in the future. He says he's going to deliver it to God the Father, and it was very clear to them where he was residing at that time and where he will reside and where we'll be with him. When Peter uses this phrase, or uses this term, it's where, you notice how he says it's, that we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Well, where righteousness dwells, that's where God is. And he says they're going to, that we, according to his promise, the promise of Christ, look for this new heavens, this new earth, in which righteousness, that's where God dwells, and that's where we're going to dwell as well. And so we need to be very careful to make sure that we understand this as figurative language when we start looking at these. There is no mention anywhere in Scripture that the New Jerusalem, and a lot of people ask that, is the New Jerusalem going to be on earth? Is that where, that we're talking about the New Jerusalem? Well, and when you go on in Revelation 21, it talks about the New Jerusalem, but there's no mention anywhere that New Jerusalem is going to be on earth. In fact, when you look at Matthew 24 and 35, and the next several verses that we're going to be looking at right here talk about what's going to happen to the earth once we're gone, or once God's finished with it. In Matthew 24:35, it says, heaven and earth will pass away. Pass away is exactly probably what you're thinking it means. When we have someone that we love or someone we care about, we know that people in this life pass away, don't they? It's the same term. It's the same meaning of that. No longer are they here. They have passed away. And so it's the same phrase that Matthew 24 uses, that heaven and earth is going to pass away. I want to read 2 Peter 3, beginning in verse 10, to really capture the essence of what Peter's talking about with these. And you need to be very careful, because there are some translations of the Bible that mistranslate these words. And sometimes they might be Bibles that we use, and we don't realize it, but it is a mistranslation, and if we're not careful, it really corrupts this and causes a lot of confusion. In 2 Peter 3, beginning of verse 10, it says, the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with the fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. And therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, that is no longer here, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. And nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. And this really kind of pulls this all together. When you look at this, it doesn't say that it's going to be renovated. It doesn't say that it's going to be reconstructed. And here's where you need to be careful with some of the translations that are out there. Some of them will use that term at the end of verse 10, and they, instead of saying it's going to be burned up, they'll say that it's going to be laid bare. And that's where a lot of the thinking comes, that they take this, and laid bare is not a credible definition of what this word means. Now, it has meant laid bare in some occasions. And that's why they try to say, because if they can get you to believe that, well, the earth is going to be laid bare and everything's just going to be destroyed, and then God's just going to put everybody onto this renovated place, that's where they come with it. But that's not what that's not what the credible lexicons, and that's not what the proper Greek means by being burned up. There's also some translations that say that it's going to be discovered. And there you need to be careful of that, because by implication it means that we're going to find this, or we're going to realize, hey, we're on this new place. That's not the correct translation of that either. Now, it's one of the older translations, but you need to be careful. Just because it's older doesn't mean it's more correct. And we know that by some of the other things that we see in these different Bible translations as well. When you look at the Greek term, and there's three of them that are key right here. The first one, as we see within these passages, is burned up. That means literally consumed by fire. There's going to be nothing left of it. Then you see that term dissolved. That term dissolved means destroyed. You destroy something, that's it, isn't it? You can't, there's nothing left of it. If I destroy, when they destroy a building or when they destroy a car, they might be able to rebuild something or try to take the parts and rebuild, but it's not ever the same thing. It's something completely different. And then that third one is melt that we see in this, and that means destroyed by fire, to melt. And we've probably seen things destroyed by fire in our lifetime. And so those are the three that are key terms within 2 Peter chapter 3 right there. That New Jerusalem, when we look at it, is simply a new place for us to dwell. And if it's not on earth, there's only one other option, and that's in the heavenly realm. We're going to be there if we're faithful to God. And how amazing that is that we're going to get to see that New Jerusalem. We're going to see that, this new place for us to dwell. There's a lot of our loved ones that have already crossed over, and they're just waiting for it. They're going to, they're already anxious, and think of just what an amazing experience that they're having right now. But we're going to have that as well. And if we're faithful and we're obedient to God, we know that we'll be able to be there too. I want to offer a couple of more passages, and here's one that's really a key to understanding this as far as where heaven's going to be. If you look over at John chapter 14, and this is really a great indicator right here. This is very telling when you get into a discussion like this. John chapter 14, beginning in verse 1, John writes, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And in my Father's house are many mansions. And if it were not so, I would have told you." And then listen to what John says right here concerning Christ. "I go to prepare a place for you." You notice that? He says, I go. Go is a verb, meaning that I'm going to leave. If I go somewhere, I'm not going to be in the same place, am I? When I go home tonight, I won't be here. If I go downtown, I'm not going to be at this end of the city. He says, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will, look at this, come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Folks, that is one of probably the greatest evidences right there that there will never be a renovated earth. There will be no such thing, that we will have a place that we will be going to with Christ. Because first off, where did Jesus go when he left his disciples? What's he talking about right here? Well, he's talking about the ascension. He ascended into heaven. And how interesting it was right here, that when he's talking to his disciples, he could have told them right here, well, where you are, that's where I'm going to be. But he didn't say that, did he? The Bible doesn't say when we meet him in the air. When we look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and this talks a great deal about when we meet him in the air, and we know that he's not coming down to earth again. There's nowhere in the Bible that says he's going to be setting foot on the earth again. That's why we know premillennialism is false. But in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, the Bible doesn't say when we meet him in the air that he's going to usher us back down to earth, does it? Doesn't say that we're going to usher him back down to earth. It says we're going to meet him in the air. That's it. Nothing else to do. Why? Because there's not going to be an earth to walk on. Everything's going to be gone. It's going to be dissolved. It's going to be burned up. When you look at Hebrews chapter 6, beginning in verse 19, the writer of Hebrews says, "This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which enters the presence behind the veil, where the forerunner has entered for us, even Jesus, having become high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." There's a couple of things at play right here, and I love reading Hebrews, because Hebrews is the transitional book. It's the one that talks about the better law, the better covenant. And Hebrews talks a great deal about, when you study types and shadows, this is the book to go to, because it really opens up what, the Old Testament was talking about. There's an old saying that the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. And we see a great deal of that in the book of Hebrews. And when you look at this, when you look at the function or the position of what the high priest was to the Jews, and then Christ being our high priest, it really makes sense of this. We know that Christ is the high priest. And then it mentions that he is going to, when you look at this veil, it says he's going to enter the presence behind the veil. This is a reference all the way back to what the Ark of the Covenant was within the tabernacle. And remember, everything in the Ark of the Covenant was referencing something under the new system, under the new law, the new covenant. It was a physical indicator of what was to come. And we have the table of showbread, we have the altar, and all of these things are representations of things to come. Then you have that veil, and remember that veil was ripped down at the cross. And then behind that veil, though, what they had it back then, it was the most holy place. Well, what was the most holy place? It was a representation of heaven. And he says, Jesus, right here, who is our high priest, who's now our high priest, has entered that veil. He says, I go to the most holy place. Behind that holy place is heaven. And that's how we can know with Hebrews, that's how we can know with all these other passages, that Jesus right now, that Christ, is currently in heaven. He has entered heaven. I have entered the most holy place. And then he says, I am coming to receive you where I am. He doesn't say, I'm coming to you. He doesn't say, just hold on there. I'm just going to clear the earth off so that everybody can live there. He says, I'm going to bring you to me. I'm going to receive you where I am. And that's how he can know also with that. Now, when we look at the new heavens and the new earth, also it's so important to understand the original language of what that word new means, because that will help us have a great deal of understanding. That Greek term for new, when you look at it, in fact, in the two New Testament parts that we were looking at, is the word kainos. The Old Testament, the Hebrew for that word is hadash, which I'll get to in just a moment. But the new, in fact, there's two words that are key words that in the New Testament, or in the Greek, rather, that mean new. One is kainos, and the other one is neos. Now, neos and kainos in some places are interchangeable with one another. We're going to look at that in just a moment. But kainos, new, listen to the definition of it. This is in just about every definition there is in the New Testament. It means new in nature. It doesn't mean that there's a new place, new geographically. It's new in nature. It's better. It's superior. In other words, it's not going to be this place. It's going to be something completely fresh, completely new. When you look at, in looking at a couple of different lexicons, I started looking at these just to try to get an idea of the different definitions of these words. In Mounce's lexicon, which is one that I really like to use a lot, Mounce, who is very reliable, he renders it newly made. That doesn't mean renovated. Young's Analytical Concordance says recent, newly made. It's something completely different than where we are right now. In the Abbott Smith Manual Greek Lexicon, that which is unused or unaccustomed. Folks, this has nothing to do with a renovated earth or a recycled earth or a reconstructed earth. Everything is brand new. It's fresh. And when you look at the Hebrew term of that, hadash, it is new or unheard of. Now, when you take that and you couple it with a few different verses, it really helps flesh this out even more. In Matthew chapter 9 and verse 17, new is the word neos, you'll see a lot where this is interchangeable with neos and kainos. Now, why do I bring this up? In Matthew 9:17, it talks about the new wine. Not old, new wine, it's not renovated wine. It talks about the new wine that is put in these wineskins, isn't it? There's a reason for that. It's not renovated wine, it's not old wine, it's not used wine, it's new wine, fresh or recently made. Now you couple that with Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 8, and this is probably one of the most compelling descriptions right here that we can compare it to. New, kainos, we hear in we see in Hebrews 8:8 regarding the new covenant. Is it a renovated covenant? It's the same word. We're not under a renovated covenant. When you look at the old covenant and the new covenant, this is not just some renovated thing that we just take the old covenant and we're just trying to alter it or reshape it or remold it or recycle it. This is a completely new covenant that we're under. The old covenant has, that's been fulfilled. That's done away. We don't have anything to do with the old covenant. It was good for what it was. It served a purpose for what it was. Well, we don't take part in any of the sacrifices that they did. We don't build the altars that they did. We don't burn the incense that they did. That was a law specifically for them. The new covenant that we are under is not a renovated covenant. It's not a reconstructed covenant. It's a brand new covenant, as we see in Hebrews 8:8. And when you look at Matthew 26 and verse 28, Christ says, "For this is my blood of the new covenant." Everything's brand new. It's completely different. I'm going to give you some scriptures that describe heaven also as a separate place. And you can write these down. I'm not going to read them for time's sake, but it is a great study when you start looking, especially if you come in contact with someone that does believe that we're going to have a recycled earth. You can go to some of these, in addition to everything that we've already looked at. Matthew 5:12. Matthew 16:19, Matthew 19:21, and if you want these, I can give them to you again if you missed one. Excuse me, Matthew 19:21, 2 Corinthians 5:1, Colossians 1:5, and 1 Peter 1:4. All of these passages describe heaven as a separate place, something completely different than where we're at right now. Friends, heaven is a place where you can be if you're prepared. It is a place that we are striving to reach. It is a place that is going to be more glorious, I think, than we could ever even imagine. And it's a place that's not going to be here. We can be up there. No tears up there. And there's a couple of other references in that song as well. You think about this. When Christ comes back, it's going to be sudden. It's going to be unexpected. And no one's going to see it coming. And it's going to be final. And at that point, there's not a single person that is going to have a chance at that point to respond. There's going to be no more invitation offered. That's going to be it. No one's going to be able to buy more time. No one's going to be able to change their fate. That's going to be it. And you think of everything we've studied tonight, looking at heaven and looking at how great it's going to be. Your decision this day, your decision this hour, tonight, might be the very one to decide where you're going to stand at judgment. Because there will be a judgment. And every one of us is going to give an account of that. And we will be in one or two places after we die. But as you consider that, please consider answering the invitation if you need to correct something in your own life. Let's stand and